What I tried to do as a storyteller in comics for the many books I participated in was to communicate ideas, not just about getting a chance to illustrate fantasy that I enjoy, but it always is about imparting some evaluation of life in some respect. It's communicating thoughts, communicating with your fellow man, trying to connect. I think the dream of any person going into a craft, into the arts, is to feel supported when you're doing it, and it's been my fortune to have a parent who was working in that field. My mother was drawing a little bit when I was a kid growing up, but before I was born, she was an artist working in advertising and some paid illustration back in the 50s before she started a family. It seemed like I had kind of inherited the skill or the inclination towards art, because it was a strong drive and passion for me. I wanted nothing more than to draw as a response to all the things I would either watch on TV or the toys I would play with. I'd want to create art based upon these things. I was slowly becoming more of a realist as a kid, finding my particular style, if you can call it such, finding that I wanted to base things upon reality. I wanted things to look real, and that's the way her artwork was bent towards. She came up in the same art school that I would go to, and her focus was on realistic illustration, but I also was looking for a certain kind of dramatic, physical appeal that the world of science fiction, fantasy, and comics seemed to hold, and really that wasn't a separation from realism. It's just I had to find that correlation between all those things. And the thing is, those things have always been a part of a whole. It's just a matter of what subject matter you were focusing on. And of course, my mom would be a very supportive force for that. And when I would see her draw, it made me feel very proud and feeling like, oh, what I'm doing is very normal. Of course, it has a purpose as well as an application to the real world. I could do this as a job. In fact, that's what I had the comfort of feeling like that's my whole life. I'm going to be an artist professionally. Why wouldn't I be? My mom was. Coming right onto the scene of trying to get a job in the arts out of school, I wanted to jump in feet first, hoping that I could have a job the second I'm out. I would eventually get hooked up with the largest ad agency in Chicago. I got interviewed there, and then got to get a full-time job, an actual 9-to-5 traditional job with a cubicle and everything that I would go into to draw every day, draw storyboards, which we would color with markers and draw as realistically as you could. And, using things like photo reference and all that stuff was part of the job. And every bit of this was applicable to what I wanted to do in comics. But it wasn't, for me, it wasn't the end goal. And all the way eventually it led to a connection to a local-based comic company, and showed my samples there. But the opportunities did come, and I was able to throw myself into all of them as best I could. So I did take on this comic book job when I had a 9-to-5 job. I didn't quit the 9-to-5 job. In fact, I kept it for 3.5 years after that. But my first comics work for a Terminator spin-off comic, I did while I was working there. I would go home every day at 5, 6 o'clock, and then put in another 5, 6 hours in the evening painting a page. Painting, when I say that, I mean more colored pencil on black paper, but trying to create enough pages to fill up 22 pages a month to fit the deadline of this comic book. For creating any illustration I do, a lot of the hard nuts and bolts work is done right at the outset of the sketch. So I do a tight sketch of something where, I might, could I show something? I might loosely have something here that I work up as a fairly rough drawing. And as I do an initial rough, this would be enough to submit for getting them to sign off on it. But because I'm a lunatic, I wind up doing a tighter version of this, which I then, say stick on another piece of layout paper, draw it up with tighter details. I put shade into it. I render details so that, in effect, this was a tight pencil you could ink. But for me, it's a sounding board for where I'm going to go take photo reference. Sometimes it's of live models. Sometimes it's of toys, because I've got so many toys that apply to the shapes and characters that the reference and details, the lighting on those things, those costumes, would matter a lot for informing what way I'm going to paint and shadow the figure. So I can learn a lot from that photography. So you start to inject some aspect of humanity that you can learn from something beyond just what's in your mind's eye, because what you can draw from your own mind is going to have only so much reality you've collected up there. There's only so much realism you contain here before you need to then look at a thing to recognize, oh, okay, those details, right, yes. So there's always more you can learn from absorbing more of the world. So as I then go to the process of putting it on paper, I blow up my tight sketch to the full size of the painting I do, about usually 12 by 18 for an average cover, and then import reference, like I'll have photos that'll be just sitting here, because I still don't work on a computer or anything, and I'll sit here and look at the photos and try and transplant those details I'm learning from the photo onto my final piece of art. There is no tracing of photographs. I don't use an artograph. So everything that you see drawn, painted in my work is as good or bad as I can draw it. I'm painting on it with gouache paints, which I do in various layers of, first doing a sort of tonal layer of usually often black and white or sepia tones. Sometimes I'll choose a color that'll imbue the whole thing as a first pass, and then you do spot colors of the various things in the piece. And then I might use airbrush to accentuate an entire look of color over the whole piece, or just key areas. But the majority of all the painting is done by hand, is done with just a brush and gouache paint. My dad's being a minister certainly was a big part of my life, since I went to church all the way up through till I went to college, till I left the home. And I always admired him, even if I wasn't necessarily drawn towards the idea of what he did as a living as being something inspiring for me, but I always felt a strong connection to it because it's played such a part in my youth. But it was also the kind of guy he is. He's got a strong social conscience to him, and his words, his sermons would speak towards a general spirit of right and wrong as inspired by the parables in the Bible. And my favorite project to work on was Kingdom Come, because it was so personalized. Using my father as the main character made it feel like this is one for the ages, that it'll mean something to me personally, it might mean something more to my family, I felt that it should have resonance because to me it felt important, creating a story that would now stand as the last great superhero battle or some such thing. And it was well accepted at the time, but I wouldn't know that as I was working on it. It just felt important to me, and my hopes were that it would be as important to others as it would to me as I was doing it. And I was also kind of throwing in every conceptual thing I had in my bucket of ideas at that point in my life, because there was such an array of characters that would need to be seen within it. I was throwing in things that I had developed as character design since I was 10 years old. So an odd, terrible design for a character, I would just make a character in the story. I needed more in the background. Like, somebody has to be fighting here, I'll make that one. And then I could tell the story later, like, yeah, I created that when I was 10. Nobody cares, but, it could be a grab bag of everything of my life brought to fruition. The whole idea of feeling like, you've made it to the top of the mountain, like you had a certain kind of feeling of career satisfaction, to me was kind of embodied with the moment that I met John Romita Sr. when he came up to me when I was sitting at the Marvel booth signing a poster promoting the upcoming series Marvels. This was in 1993 when I was 23 years old, and he already knew who I was, and he had seen the work in the offices, and he was complimentary, and he talked to me like I was just another guy. I just thought, like, there you go. That was one of my greatest heroes, one of the people I respected the most in this business, and to be treated as an equal by him, and for the time I would see him thereafter, I couldn't do any better. That's it. Let me just cash out now. I don't want to meet anybody ever again. I can't do better than this experience. And he gave me that sense of the peak of my career. And I was 23 and I just began my career. In movies, I was, like anybody else, inspired by all the sci-fi fantasy stuff that would come out in the 70s that would change the way that we see this stuff today. But for as many people became devotees to Star Wars, for me, nothing was cooler than Flash Gordon, because that had a Queen soundtrack. And what would make the adventures of Luke Skywalker better? Queen, rock music. So I've gotten a chance to work with almost all the things that I had passion for as a kid, and even including music, where I've done paintings of things like, I never would have expected I'd be able to do official Beatles artwork. But now I have, for one of my favorite movies and greatest animations was Yellow Submarine. So, and my passion for these things has really remained undimmed, because when I look back at them, I can remember exactly what I felt when I saw them then, and I can compare it to what I view today and still say, there is still something still unique to these things from decades gone by, that they still offer something that isn't necessarily captured by current entertainment in the exact same way or surpassed by it. A lot of my passions for the comics had always come from its origins. Looking back on the history of it was always fascinating to me in a way of understanding where the core ideas were before they would get handled by so many people over decades, where in some ways you stretch out an idea that it starts to not resemble where it began. And so if you look back at the origins of these things, like even look at the Max Fleischer cartoons of Superman from 1941, and they're stupendous, and they will inspire you tremendously. So for me, it was like, just like Steve Root had done before me, you gravitate to this thing and figure out how do you adapt it into a modern context where people see it and can be as impressed with that version of a classic character that maybe they don't perceive it that way anymore. So I want to make the contemporary audience like them as much as I do. So when I put my efforts towards trying to make you care about the Golden Age Captain Marvel, I figure you already like Wolverine. Why waste my time with him? Okay? Why kill myself to make you care about these characters that are immediately popular? I want to make you care about something that's, in a way, a purer context. I put my back into that and try and make you think, oh wow, Superman is as cool as Spider-Man or anybody else that you respect. And if I can bring some edge to it, some aspect that I might recognize and beef up for your evaluation, that hopefully you'll see it the same way I do. There's no challenge when it comes to something that's already popular. So I tried adapting that into my work with not just Superman, but all the characters. Look back at their origins, find something pure in that classic sense that maybe has been forgotten. For me, it was like Wonder Woman used to have a skirt. Well, then I gave Wonder Woman kind of a loincloth treatment, and it was a neat look for her. The sort of stiffness of the Bob Kane, Dick Sprang art style was something I applied to Batman wearing armor, and just even the squinting-eyed head shape, the wider kind of look for Superman that had a strong kind of Clint Eastwood sort of vibe. Well, that was in his origins, not in his present. His present was supposed to be the handsomest man you'd ever seen, but his origins had this distinctive character that I thought had been lost, and I wanted to pick back up on that. So there is always something fascinating to look at if you open your mind to the past. If you only looked at what was in the present, you're getting something that's been an overbaked potato.